All right, today we're going to try to get through as much of Genesis chapters 15, 16, and 17 as we can. These are extremely important chapters. In fact, you'll find that much of what we see in the New Testament epistles have a basis in the factual setting we have here at this particular point in Abraham's life. Abraham is referred to as the father of all people of faith. And I think that's interesting because what we've seen with Abraham is that, yes, he did turn out to be a great man of faith, not denigrating him at all. But we also see that after God called him, that Abraham had certain of his own problems. You know, Abraham he didn't start off perfectly as if God called him to do something. He says, yes, Lord, and he did it with all of his might, and he did it directly without delay or without wandering off in the wrong direction.
He was human, huh?
Yeah, he was human, very human, and we can learn a lot. I think one of the reasons why we see the mistakes and why the scriptures reveal the mistakes that he made is because these are the types of mistakes that all of us make. And it shows us how to get back on track. For example, when God first called Abram, he was living where?
Ur of the Chaldees.
In Ur of the Chaldees. He was an idolater. The ancient Jewish writings said that he and his family actually manufactured or made and sold idols. God called him and said, I want you to come to the land of Canaan. So what did Abram do? Did he pack up his tent and hightail it to the land of Canaan? He kind of started in that direction. All right, so he made a pretty good effort, and he wound up and he kind of stalled out there at where? Haran. He stayed there, and he decided he was going to pitch his tent there for a while, and he stayed there until his father died. You know, so what do we see? Was Abram obedient to God? Yes, to an extent, but he got sidetracked. He got distracted. Any of you ever been there? God calls you to do something, you make it about 2/3 of the way, and you say, got a few other things to take care of. You know, my dad needs this, my mother needs this, my family needs this, and so you get kind of stalled out. We all do, and I think that's why we had this lesson of Abram. He was following God, he got sidetracked. He wound up in Haran. Finally, God comes to him again, and he said, Abram, did I tell you that I wanted you to stay in Haran? No. He says, I told you before that I want you to go to the land of Canaan, so get over there. So, all right, then with that second reminder, Abram packs up, he moves his family and everything that he acquired to Canaan, where God wanted him to be. And then what happened?
God spoke to him first,
He did.
and then he kind of got off track. Then God came down. And
Yeah,
told him.
that's right.
That's right.
Like he's getting a little bit closer, like, maybe you didn't hear me just right before. I'm going to talk in your ear this time.
Also, his father,
Right,
didn't his father die? Or father-in-law die?
His father, yes.
Father.
Yes.
He might have been tired of hearing, are we there yet?
That's right.
So he stopped.
So he makes it to Canaan, gets to the land of Canaan, and what happens there? Then a famine comes along the land.
Yes.
And did God tell him to go anywhere? But what does he do?
He takes off to Egypt.
He takes off to Egypt. So again, he shows another weakness. God says, go to the land of Canaan and stay there. He didn't say, stay there as long as things are good. So got a little pressure, food got a little bit scarce, and what does he do? He's no longer depending on God. He wanders down into Egypt. He goes to the Egyptians and to the Pharaoh in search for help. I don't think God was too happy with that. And while he's down there, he tells a little lie, or at least a half lie, about his wife, Sarai. As a result of that little circumstance, some plagues come down upon the Pharaoh, and finally the Pharaoh realizes what's going on and says, this woman Sarai that I've invited into my tent, she's your wife. And because of what you've allowed to happen, I've got all these plagues. So he says to Abram, just pick up take your wife and just get out of here, go back. And so Abram goes back, and he winds up back to exactly the spot where he started out, which was between Bethel, or the house of God, on the west, and Ai, which is the heap of ruins, on the right. He's right in between. Okay, and so verse 13 starts off there. That's where Abram is, and then we see that his shepherds, if you will, and Lot's shepherds get into a little bit of a squabble, and they decide that they need to divide up. And of course, the division between Abram and Lot is something that God had instructed Abram to do early on. At the beginning of chapter 12, the Lord says to Abram, he says, go forth from your country. Basically says, leave your country and leave your relatives and from your father's house and go where I'll show you. So God had ordained all along that Abram would be separated from his family, which includes Lot. So the separation ultimately occurs in chapter 13. So Lot throws in his lot with some ne'er-do-wells who are living around Sodom and Gomorrah. A war comes about. 5 kings are fighting against 4 other kings, and as a result of the skirmish, Lot and his family get kidnapped and taken off. So Abram gets his mighty army of how many people?
318.
300. He had 318 armies, and he goes to war against thousands, who knows? I mean, it's basically 9 kings are fighting against each other. He goes in and he's successful. And not only does he rescue Lot and his family, there's a lot of possessions a lot of spoils that are available to him. And then we see that this very interesting thing in chapter 14, verse 17, that when he returns from the defeat of this king, that the king of Sodom goes out to meet him in the valley. And basically what he's going to do, I think this king of Sodom, who's representing the intervention of Satan here, I think he's going to bribe him and try to move him in his direction. But before the king of Sodom can bribe him, what happens?
Melchizedek
This enigmatic figure, this character whose name is called Melchizedek, he comes and he brings out the bread and the wine. I'll submit to you, Melchizedek is the pre-incarnate Christ. He's the high priest. It said that Christ is a priest, not of the order of Levi or Aaron. Christ is a priest of the order of Melchizedek. And we see here that Abram, at that point in time, what does Abram bring to Melchizedek?
Tenth of everything.
Yeah, he brings him a tithe.
Yes.
Acknowledging what? Because Melchizedek blesses Abram, the greater blesses the lesser. The lesser brings the tithe, and in Abram's bringing the tithe, it is as if all of his children and grandchildren and offspring after him are also bringing the tithe, which shows that even Levi and Aaron are, through Abram, bringing the tithe to this greater priest. Again, an acknowledgement that the priesthood of Melchizedek is greater than the priesthood, the Levitical priesthood that's established several generations later. And so that takes us to chapter 15, which is very important. I think 15, 16, and 17, to the extent that we can do so, we need to read these and study these together, because I think they are all relevant to each other. So let's pick up with chapter 15, verse 1. And Jackie, would you start reading for us?
After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. But Abram said, O sovereign Lord, what can you give me, since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eleazar of Damascus?
Pause right there just a second. God starts off by saying to Abram, says, he comes to him and he says, do not fear, I am a shield to you. What would Abram be fearful of at this point in time?
Was the king killing him?
Yep, I think that's part of it. You know, Abram didn't really do what the king of Sodom wanted to do at the time. So Abram sort of rebuffs the king of Sodom. So he could have been concerned about what this king would have done, the other kings in the territory were going to do to him. So he was losing confidence in the power that God had obviously instilled in him and his 318-man fighting force. But I think at this point in time, he's also getting fearful, because he's getting up in years and Sarah's getting up in years, and he's thinking, how's my family going to carry on? I don't have an heir. And so he's looking to this Syrian servant of his who's in his household, and he's basically saying, is Eleazar of Damascus going to be my offspring, so to speak? Keep reading, Jackie.
Where did I go? Oh.
Verse 3.
And Abram said, you have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir. Then the word of the Lord came to him, this man will not be your heir, but a son coming from your own body will be your heir. He took him outside and said, look up at the heavens and count the stars, If indeed you can count them, then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited to him as righteousness.
Pause right there. Boy, if this story had stopped right there, you could say, wow, God makes this promise to him, and Abram believes it, and everything is great. But that particular verse that Jackie just read there is one of the foundation and starting points of a lot of the writings of Paul, where it says that Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. That is the foundation of the Abrahamic covenant, and really I think it's the foundation of the everlasting covenant. And that is whether or not we believe God. Do you believe what God told you? At this particular point in time, Abram is very old. He knows that Sarah is beyond her childbearing years, but nevertheless God says that you will be the father of a great nation, and your descendants will be as plentiful as the stars are in the heaven. And it says that Abram believed it.
And he did believe it.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing, what I see is, if God had taken and blessed his wife to get pregnant within the next year, I don't think a lot of these other things would have happened.
Yeah.
But
Your point is well taken.
It was in God's time.
His faith lasted about that whole calendar year, right? But then you start working in that second year, so, all right, God, I'm waiting, I'm looking at the stars of the heaven and my tent's still empty.
Yeah.
But that is the point. That is the very point of it. How far did Abram's faith go, and did he continue to get off track? And we're going to see that he did continue to get off track, didn't he? All right, so God makes the promise. Abram believes it, and God reckons him and basically says, I'm now declaring you to be righteous. So verse 7, can you pick up with that to see
Yep.
what Abram's responsibility is?
He also said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to take possession of it. But Abram said, O sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it?
Pause right there. God says, I'm going to give you the land, and what does Abram say?
I don't know.
Basically,
Take it over.
he says, can you put that in writing? that's really what he said. He says, I'm promising to give you the land, and Abram says, man, I sure would like to have a deed. Can you write something up for us? And so God says, that to me shows that Abram is doubting a little bit. But God says, sure, I'll show you. I'm going to make a contract with you. I'm going to make a covenant with you right now to show you how serious I am. So read on, Kenny.
So the Lord said to him, bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. Abram brought all these to him, cut them in 2 pieces, and arranged the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half.
All right, pause right there just a second. What is this about? What is the cutting of these animals in half about?
The cutting of the covenant.
Yeah, that's the cutting of the covenant. That's the way they made contracts back then. You can see really almost throughout the Old Testament that the way, if 2 people were going to make a contract, they didn't have paper to write on. They didn't do a lot of writing back those days. And so what they did is they cut the covenant. They'd take some animals, they'd sacrifice them, they'd cut them in half, they'd arrange the pieces, and they'd walk in between them. The 2 parties to the contract, if you will, would walk in between them. And inferentially, what they were saying is that we're making a covenant, we're making mutual promises to each other, that whoever breaks the promise is going to wind up like these animals that have been cut in half. So that was, if you will, the penalty clause of the contract, that all right, we're going to keep the contract, but whoever breaks it winds up as these animals. And that was the nature of the covenant. But you can see, and we do see that the nature of the covenant was that the 2 parties to the covenant would walk through it. We're going to see something a little bit different that's done here in this Abrahamic covenant. But read on, Kate.
Why not the birds though?
That's a good question. I've never found an answer to that, why they didn't cut the birds in half. And, we could talk about the symbolism of all this. Why, for example, does he choose a 3-year-old heifer?
Because that was prime age.
Yeah.
Full grown and weight and everything.
So he's got a female,
But still tender.
Still, yeah.
still tender, and then a 3-year-old female goat, and then a ram, which would have been a male goat, right? And then 2 birds. And the 3 hoofed animals are cut in half, And then the 2 birds, they're sacrificed, but they aren't cut in half. But I suspect what you had is you had the animals, the heifer and the goat and the ram were cut in half, and each of their parts were laid there. And then on one side you had a turtle dove, on the other side you had a pigeon. I'm just speculating there.
But remember when they went to the temple in the New Testament?
Mm-hmm.
That they would buy the dove, you know, when they went for, what was it called? The Holy Days?
Yeah.
To offer as sacrifice, to
Yeah.
offer as penance
Yeah.
or whatever.
And if you were poor, you'd buy 2 turtle doves as your
Right.
as your sacrifice. So that could have some relevance there. Could have some foreshadowing. I don't know. I just have not found
Maybe it's
anything
the
that.
foreshadowing of the animals that were acceptable for sacrifices?
I think it was. Yeah, because these were used. We know.
They didn't dream it up. God told them what to
What to
Abram-
do.
what
That's right.
He told them
exactly what they were.
And we know also they had the ordinance of the red heifer that later on is the purification. So I think there is a lot of foreshadowing there. You know, maybe sometime we'll focus on that. But anyway, there is some symbolism there. But you see the cutting of the covenant. All right, so the animals are cut in half. All right, verse 12. Wanda, would you pick up there? I'm sorry, verse 11. Yeah.
Then birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away.
Paul's right there. What do you think that's symbolic
Evil
of?
things,
I think so. I think the evil is coming down and
trying to take away the sacrifice.
exactly, trying to get, I think that's the embodiment of Satan coming down, trying to get in the middle of the covenant between God and Abram and his offspring. But Abram drove them away, to his credit. Verse 12, Wanda.
As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, "Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated 400 years."
Paul's right there. Did that come about?
Yes.
Yes,
They
exactly.
were. In what country were they enslaved?
Egypt.
Egypt for exactly 400 years.
And I learned him to go to Egypt.
That's right.
Yeah, and you gotta
Bad
wonder.
stuff happens in Egypt.
You got to wonder at this point in time, why is it that at this point when God is making this tremendous covenant, this everlasting Abrahamic covenant with this man, why is it that he's telling him at this point in time that your people are going to go into slavery in Egypt for 400 years?
This is a warning.
But it's a promise to him that he is going to have a family,
Yeah,
and there will be enough of them that they will be enslaved.
yep.
But also, he's writing this later, isn't he? Or is it Moses?
Well, Moses later wrote it, but I think this is exactly what God was telling Abram at this time. I think it was a prophecy of what was going to happen in the future. And I think the slavery, and we're going to see that Egypt was always a thorn in the side of Israel spiritually, because Egypt is a metaphor for reliance upon someone or something else other than God. And we see that Israel did that quite frequently, right? Abram was the first to do it when he went down to escape the famine in the land, okay? We're going to see later on that Abraham and Sarai rely upon an Egyptian slave, okay? We're going to see, throughout the Old Testament that when something threatens Israel, rather than depending upon God, they often go to Egypt and say, "Will you help us out?" And so I think this enslavement is a rebuke.
Could you say that's why Egypt prospered? God knew what was going to happen, and he allowed Egypt to prosper so that they could go back and forth through all their generations.
Yeah, I mean, God certainly allowed Egypt to exist and to prosper, just like he raised up, Assyria, the Assyrian king, to do his bidding. He raised up the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar at a time, made him a great army to come in, destroy Israel ultimately, and to destroy the temple. So,
But at the end of the story, God's also promising that he's going to be there. When they get out of
That's right.
slavery, he's going to rescue them.
and as Wanda pointed out, God used Egypt in a mighty way, because how many people, how many of the children of Israel went into Egypt?
70?
About 70, and how many came out?
Millions.
A couple to 3 million came out, so they really did grow. They became a nation while enslaved in Egypt. Okay, read on.
But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your fathers in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation, your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure.
You know, it's interesting, we refer to the fourth generation. It's after 4 generations that they go down, right? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then Joseph is the one who goes down there. And then once they're there, the family goes down. So Levi would have been the first generation there. And then his son was Kohath, and his son was Amram, and the 4th generation after him was Moses, and that's when they come out. So it's after 4 generations, they shall return here. And there's a cross-reference there to Genesis 46:11. It shows the lineage, and also Exodus 6:16.
Should Abram be passing this, to me, it's like warning too, of what's to come. Means he's the head of the nation right
Yeah.
now, or head of the
Yeah.
household. To his kindred, and tell them, look, y'all need to stay with the Lord,
Yeah.
because this is what's gonna happen.
Yeah. And you'd have thought that the sons of Israel would have thought about that before they packed up all their tents and headed down there and said, now wait, what did he say there in Genesis 15,
Do they?
14, slavery in a
Grab a Bible.
Okay. All right, something rather strange happens here. One, read verse 17 for us.
When the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking firepot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, to your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites.
A lot of ites there, but what he says is he promises him the land. But the interesting thing I want you to see is that when it was very dark, there appeared a smoking oven and a flaming torch which passed between the cut pieces of the animal. Now what's significant about that? Abraham is not required to pass through. Rather, these two things pass through, the torch or the lamp and the oven. What do those two things represent, do you think?
Is that kind of like the pillar of fire when they were in the wandering in the desert?
In a sense. In a sense, I think they represent the same things.
Yeah, but I never heard it. Mine says a fire pot.
Yeah.
I never
Like a
heard that
fire
before.
pot with a blazing torch.
Or look first at Isaiah 48:10. Somebody read that to us.
Would it have been the Holy Spirit?
In a sense, but there are two more specific things here that could be referenced, one with the furnace and the torch. What does Isaiah 48:10 say?
See, I have refined you, though not as silver. I have tested you in the furnace of affliction.
That word right there, furnace, is the same word that's used here. That's one of the things that passes through. And so the furnace is thought by some, and I tend to agree that refers to affliction. Now what about the torch?
But the furnace is so hot it purifies, shouldn't it? Testers or purifiers.
Burn up everything in it.
Yeah. It's hotter than the torch or the.
Yeah, it's a furnace. It's a testing. Okay, it is. Think of the furnace as being affliction. What goes along with affliction? What psalm has the most references to affliction? You remember that? I think we underlined them at one point in time. Help you out. Psalm 119. Psalm 119 is the psalm that refers over and over again to affliction. But right in the middle of Psalm 119, you find one of your favorite verses, Psalm 119, verse 105, that says, "Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path." The word there, lamp, is the same thing that's referred to, so that passed between the pieces. So you have the furnace and you have the lamp or the torch. One of them could be affliction, and the other could be what? Thy word is a lamp unto my feet. Meaning what? Meaning that the essence of this covenant that God is making with Abram, there's a couple of interesting things about it. Number one, there really is no performance aspect of it insofar as Abram is concerned, right?
All you have to believe.
That's right. Abram's part is simply to believe. But God cuts the covenant, and God himself passes through in two forms. He passes between the pieces, and he passes in the form of this furnace and the torch or the lamp. And what he's saying is that the way through the covenant is going to involve affliction, but it also involves the word. And one of the things that we see in Psalm 119, it sort of ties those two together. David says time and time again, if it had not been for my affliction, I would not have come to know your word, right? And he says, I'm so thankful for my affliction. Why? Because it has brought me back to your word. And so I think one of the things that we see in this is that God is telling Abram that if you're walking with me, you will be afflicted. But what should you do when you are afflicted?
Call on me.
Call on you, Lord.
Call on me and rely on my word.
And Jesus the Word?
He is the Word. The Word became flesh. And so we have a foreshadowing of that as well. And so from this point forward, did Abram have affliction in his life?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yes, he did. He had much affliction in his life. And every time he was afflicted, if he simply would have gone back to the Word of God, he'd have been a lot better off. Because God said, he didn't give him this whole book, but God told him certain things. What did he say? Basically he said, I'm telling you the way it is, and all you have to do is believe me.
Yes.
Just believe what I'm telling you. You don't have to travel to a foreign land. You don't have to hoe a field. You don't have to do this. You don't have to do that. Just believe me. Just trust me.
He had affliction, he was married.
What's that?
He was married.
Okay. I can hear that ice starting to crack. It's-
You get the eye.
okay.
He's
All right.
got more than one.
Well, but God gave.
Help me.
Yeah, all right. Speaking of helpmates, one of the things that I want you to think about as we read Genesis chapters 15, 16, and 17 is the similarity between this and the Garden of Eden. And there is quite a similarity. It's going to come together here. For example, in the beginning, after God created man, there was a discussion between God and man. And there was, in essence, a covenant that was made. That covenant came in the form of some pretty explicit but simple instructions. What did God tell Adam?
Don't eat of the tree.
He said, see that tree right there? That one tree right there? Don't eat of its fruit. Okay? And what did they wind up doing? They ate of the fruit. Okay, so here, God comes to his chosen vessel, if you will, Abram, and he says, he doesn't tell him not to do something. He says, I'm going to tell you something that's going to happen, and all I want you to do is believe it. Okay? Just believe it and trust. And implicit in what God was telling him was to not only to believe, but also to wait. Don't just wait a short period of time, just wait until my promise is fulfilled. And the longer time goes on, the more difficult it is to believe, but he says, nevertheless, believe, not just today or tomorrow, but as you're turning the page of that calendar, just continue to wait on me and believe and trust in what I say. Why? I want you to focus on my word, because my word is a lamp unto your feet and a light unto your path. And every time you're afflicted, where should you go? Not to Egypt, you should go back to my word. Yeah.
And they waited and waited, and when Jesus came, they didn't
see it, did they? They didn't see it. All right. What time is the choir supposed to be over there?
They didn't
They
give
didn't
us
take-
the
We weren't
time.
given a time.
I'm supposed to narrate today a little bit, so I'm going to leave a little bit early too. But we're going to go back another 10 minutes or so, and then we're going to adjourn a little bit early. But as we read through chapter 16, I want you to think about how that also is similar to what happened in the Garden of Eden. All right, where we leave off. Nancy, you want to read there?
Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bore him no children. She had an Egyptian slave girl whose name was Hagar.
Pause right there. Where do you think she got that Egyptian maid? From their
When they were down in
sojourn?
Egypt.
Yep, when they went down to Egypt. So they didn't leave Egypt behind. They brought some of Egypt with them. And that would be, the old albatross about their neck even at this point in time. All right, read on, Nancy.
And Sarai said to Abram, "You see that the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my slave girl, it may be that I shall obtain children by her." And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her slave girl, and gave her to her husband Abram as a wife.
Pause right there. What does that hearken you back to? Abram takes her slave girl. It says, Sarai took Hagar the Egyptian, her maid, and gave her to her husband Abram. Yep. Make yourself a note there to Genesis 3, chapter 3, verse 6, because that's almost the same language that is used when Eve took the apple and gave it to her husband.
Genesis what?
Genesis chapter 3, verse 6. Now, it's interesting also that Sarai is a little bit, you can sense her unhappiness there in verse 2. She says, now behold, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. So she's expressing some dissatisfaction here. And it's interesting, I suspect that Abram has probably told Sarai after this manifestation, after God came to Abram and said that he was going to make him the father of a great nation. I'm sure he was so excited about that he went and told his wife, "See, we're going to be the parents of a great nation." And so Sarai's probably thinking at that time, well, okay, I'm pretty old. I'm not sure that I can go along with that, but all right, that's what God told you. We'll go along with that. So then she's waiting around. She's thinking, all right, it's been weeks, now months, it's been a while. I still don't have any kids, what's going on? And so she comes up with this plan. All right, we'll just help God along a little bit. Rather than just waiting on him, let's do something, just to show that we can get this thing done. Maybe God's forgotten about it, or maybe he's having some trouble with it, but we can help God along. We can help him along. So she comes up with a plan, and Abram says, okay, read on, Nancy, please.
He went into Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my slave girl to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me.
And Paul's right there. So Sarai comes up with the idea. Abram goes along with it, and then some conflict occurs between Sarai and Hagar. And what does Sarai do?
She says, it's all your fault.
Yeah, it's all your fault. It's always your fault. So anyway, all right, we've all been
What does
there.
that sound
I'm not saying.
It's usually the other way around.
like? So you get fed, huh?
That's right. Okay, read on. Terry, you want to pick up from there?
Okay. Verse 6.
Yes.
Your servant is in your hands, Abram said. Do with her whatever you think best. And Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress Sarai, she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, Go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will so increase your descendants that they will be too numerous to count. The angel of the Lord also said to her, You are now with child, and you will have a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he will live in hostility toward all his brothers.
Paul's right there just a second. My translation says that he will live to the east of all of his brothers. I think that's probably the literal translation, although what Terry read really is the effect of it. Because what do we say earlier that symbolically or metaphorically when it says that you're moving to the east, what does that mean?
Away from God.
You're moving away from God, which naturally will put you in conflict with your brothers. All right, read on to verse 16 to the end, Terry, and then we'll talk about this.
So right there, that's where it divides. That's a critical point right there. That's where history right divided, where you got, and the brothers would be any offspring of Abraham. Those are your brothers, but there's always going to be a problem between the two.
It is, and it is said here that Ishmael was the father of the Arab nations.
Right?
Okay?
Exactly.
And we know historically, to this very day, to this very hour, there is conflict between the Arabs, the sons of Ishmael, if you
East and
will,
west.
and the sons of Abraham, which would be the Jews. They have been in conflict for thousands of years, and they will remain in conflict until Christ returns. So we have here in the blood, we have the division. We have the Ishmaelites versus the children of Isaac, the promised line, okay? So we know that they're two separate peoples. But this also represents something else. Because as we'll read later on, after our time out is called, we're going to read in Romans and Galatians that what we have here is metaphorical, okay? It is allegorical. And that Sarah and Isaac represent the promise, okay? And Hagar and Ishmael represent works of the flesh. One is referred to as the son of flesh, and the other is referred to as the son of promise. And so what we have here is a declaration that the child of promise will always be in conflict with what?
The child of the flesh.
The child of the flesh. So that is, and as Paul described this phenomenon in other ways too, he says, those who are led by the Spirit will always be in conflict with the flesh. And so what we're seeing here is the great metaphor again of those who follow after the flesh go one way and those who follow after the Spirit go another way. But this is kind of the beginning of that, and we see this theme repeated over and over again.
Was that like Jacob and Esau?
Exactly, it's like Jacob and Esau, and it's not unlike something we saw before. Cain and Abel in their sacrifices. Cain brings his sacrifice, basically says, look what I've done, the works of the flesh. Abel brings the sacrifice that says, woe is me. This is what I deserve to be as my animal sacrifice. Which starts up?
Well, throughout the Bible, it's predicted Jesus, which is on the west, okay? Now, after Jesus came Muhammad. Is there anywhere in there that you know of where it predicts that East is having a future leader of sorts?
Well, we're going to see later on when we get into it that God does say He's going to bless Ishmael, and it says that he will have 12 sons, or there'll be 12 princes that come after him. Today, Islam is looking for the rise of the 12th Imam. And that could be the connection there. The 12th leader who will come about, he'll basically be their Messiah. So, again, I don't know if they Jackie's calling a timeout here. I don't know if they refer back, and that's where the reference to the 12th Imam or their Messiah comes from, but it might be. Anyway.
But we still fight within ourselves, our fleshly desires and our spiritual. And it's within me.
Yeah.
So.
And this too, again, we're going to spend some more time talking about this because this is so important. It is the war between the flesh and the spirit. Okay, and you see here when in verse 9 it says the angel Lord says to Hagar, says, return to your mistress and submit yourself to her authority. That's basically saying you are after the flesh. Your mind is set after the flesh. Go back and submit to the spirit, to the leading of God. One way is to follow God in obedience to Him, and the other is to take the fleshly course and try to take things into your own hands, do things your own way, do things by the flesh. So we're going to carry on with that next time. Next time we're going to talk about, in chapter 17, the name change from Abram to Abraham, and we're also going to talk about circumcision, how that fits into exactly where we're going, and how it fits in chronologically about the Abrahamic covenant, the dalliance, where Hagar and Ishmael come in, and then circumcision following that, and how all those three relate together. All right, any other comments on this before we go?